On August 6, 1945, as the world watched in horror as the atomic mushroom cloud rose over Hiroshima, few realized an even more astonishing truth. The aircraft carrying that bomb was flying at an altitude where no Japanese fighter could effectively intercept it. The Boeing B-29 Superfortress was not just a bomber. It was a flying fortress that completely redefined the rules of aerial warfare by routinely operating at 31,050 feet, a combat zone where the Japanese simply could not reach it. But the true revolution was not just in altitude, it was in the fact that, for the first time in military aviation history, an aircraft could combine intercontinental range, devastating payload capacity, and tactical invulnerability into a single platform. While B-17 and B-24 bombers struggled to survive at 25,000 feet against German fighters, the B-29 operated 6,050 feet higher, in a realm where the physics of the rarefied atmosphere became its greatest ally. This was not just technological superiority. It was absolute domination of the airspace through engineering. The conception of the B-29 was born out of a desperate need that few Americans understood in 1940: how to bomb Japan from American bases if the Pacific War intensified. While Europe offered relatively close Allied bases to German targets, the Pacific presented a brutal geographical challenge, thousands of miles of ocean separating any safe base from Japanese industrial centers. General Henry Hap Arnold, commander of the Army Air Forces, knew he needed something revolutionary. A bomber capable of flying 3,250 miles, carrying 20,000 pounds of bombs, operating at altitudes where enemy resistance would be minimal. But when Boeing engineers presented the first sketches, even Arnold was shocked by the audacity of the project. The proposed aircraft would be 50% larger than any existing bomber, weigh 133,500 pounds fully loaded, and cost more than an aircraft carrier. More impressive still, it would fly at altitudes where atmospheric pressure was so low that the crew would need pressurized cabins to survive, a technology that did not even exist reliably in 1940. When the first XB-29 prototype took off on September 21, 1942, it carried with it the hope and terror of a new era of aerial warfare. Test pilot Eddie Allen knew he was flying something unprecedented, a 99-foot-long aircraft with a wingspan of 141 feet and 3 inches, powered by 4 Wright R-3350 duplex Cyclone engines of 2,200 horsepower each. But the raw numbers did not tell the whole story. The true revolution was in the pressurization system that allowed the crew to operate comfortably at 31,050 feet without oxygen masks, while remote control systems operated the 50-caliber machine gun turrets. During that first flight, Allen reported something that would forever change strategic bombing doctrine. "It's like piloting a spaceship compared to anything I've ever flown. At 30,000 feet, the air was so rarefied that aerodynamic drag decreased drastically, allowing cruising speeds of 290 mph, faster than many fighters at lower altitudes." But there was a terrible price for this supremacy. The R-3350 engines were so complex and powerful that they constantly overheated, causing in-flight fires that killed dozens of test pilots, including Eddie Allen himself. Lieutenant Colonel Paul Tibbets would never forget the first day he saw a B-29 flying at maximum altitude over the Wendover base in Utah in 1944. "It looked like a silver dot against the blue sky," he would recall years later. "But we knew it was carrying 10 tons of bombs at a height where no enemy fighter could touch us." Tibbets was commanding the ultra-secret program that would train crews for the most important missions of the war, but even he did not fully understand the magnitude of the tactical advantage that the B-29 provided. The operational altitude of 31,850 feet was not just an impressive number, it was a physical barrier that separated the B-29 from virtually all Japanese air defense. The Zero fighters, which had dominated Pacific skies in the early years of the war, had a service ceiling of only 32,110 feet, theoretically capable of reaching the B-29, but in practice completely ineffective at that altitude. At 30,000 feet, a Zero took more than 20 minutes to climb, consuming so much fuel that it had only a few minutes of combat time before needing to descend. Worse still, at that altitude, the Zero's controls became so heavy and unresponsive that Japanese pilots could barely maneuver, let alone aim accurately. Captain Robert Morgan, a veteran of 25 missions over Germany in the B-17 Memphis Belle, could hardly believe it when he was transferred to the B-29 in 1944. In the B-17, we flew at 25,000 feet and were easy targets for the Messerschmitts. he recalled. In the B-29, we flew 7,000 feet higher, and it was like being in another world. The difference was not just psychological, it was mathematically devastating for the Japanese defenders. Japanese anti-aircraft artillery, based mainly on 75mm and 88mm guns, had a maximum effective range of 26,000 feet. This meant that the B-29, operating at 31,150 feet, was almost 6,000 feet above the range of Japan's most powerful artillery. But the true genius of the B-29 was not just in flying high, it was in maintaining bombing accuracy at that altitude. The Norden bomb site had been specifically modified to compensate for wind speed and air density at 30,000+ feet, allowing crews to hit targets with deadly precision from an altitude where they were practically invulnerable. Morgan described the sensation. It was like being a god of war. We could see everything, hit anything, and they couldn't touch us. In March 1945, when General Curtis LeMay ordered the first major B-29 incursion over Tokyo, he was betting everything on the aircraft's altitude supremacy. The mission would involve 334 B-29s flying at 31,000 feet, carrying a total of 1,765 tons of incendiary bombs, the largest concentration of firepower ever dropped from such a high altitude. Major Thomas Farabee, bombardier of the Enola Gay, described the view from that altitude. Tokyo stretched below us like a detailed map. We could see every block, every factory, every port, and they couldn't see us. The Japanese defense desperately tried to intercept the formation. More than 150 Zero and Kawasaki Ki-61 Tony fighters took off to face the American bombers, but physics was against them. At 31,000 feet, Japanese fighter engines produced only 60% of their sea-level power. Their pilots, even with oxygen masks, suffered from hypoxia that drastically affected their reflexes and judgment. Of the 334 B-29s that participated in the mission, only 14 were lost, a casualty rate of 4.2%, compared to the typical 10–15% of B-17 missions over Germany. Altitude had become the ultimate weapon. Technical Sergeant Jacob Beezer, radar operator of the Enola Gay, never forgot the deadly silence that reigned at 31,150 feet during the approach to Hiroshima. There was no flak, no fighters, nothing but blue sky and the city sprawling below like a model, he recalled decades later. It was almost surreal. We were about to change the world, and no one on the ground even knew we were there. The extreme altitude of the B-29 not only provided tactical invulnerability, it created a deep psychological disconnect between attacker and target. At 6 miles high, people on the ground were invisible, explosions seemed like distant fireworks, and destruction became abstract. But for the Japanese, that same altitude represented a devastating technological humiliation. Their best fighters, their most powerful guns, their most refined tactics, all became useless against an enemy operating in a vertical dimension they simply could not reach. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto had predicted that Japan would need to win the war quickly before American industrial superiority manifested. The B-29, serenely flying at 31,150 feet, was the physical manifestation of that superiority, a demonstration that the United States had not only matched but completely transcended Japanese military capabilities. Colonel Tibbets, now commanding the 509th Composite Group, knew that each B-29 mission at maximum altitude was more than a bombing. It was a demonstration of technological supremacy that was systematically breaking Japanese morale. They could see us on radar, knew we were coming, but couldn't do anything to stop us, he explained in post-war reports. It was psychological warfare in its purest form. American intelligence data confirmed this devastating assessment. Intercepted. Japanese radio communications revealed growing frustration among fighter pilots reporting targets at 32,000 feet, impossible to intercept effectively. Japanese commanders began withdrawing fighters from B-29 interception missions, recognizing that they were wasting precious fuel and experienced pilots on futile attempts. Altitude had become more than a tactical advantage. It was a psychological weapon that demonstrated the futility of Japanese resistance. Each B-29 that passed unimpeded over Japan at 31,150 feet was a clear message. The war was lost, and American technology had made the defense of Japanese territory impossible. In September 1945, when Japan surrendered, Japanese officials specifically cited the invulnerability of B-29 bombers as one of the factors that made continuing the war unthinkable. The legacy of the B-29 transcended its altitude supremacy to completely redefine strategic air power doctrine. The ability to operate at 31,850 feet was not just a technical specification. It was a conceptual revolution that proved altitude could be directly converted into tactical invulnerability. After the war, when Soviet engineers examined captured B-29s, they were shocked not only by the sophistication of the pressurization systems, but by the design philosophy that prioritized extreme altitude over maximum speed or maneuverability. The Tu-4, a Soviet copy of the B-29, religiously maintained the capability to fly at 32,000+ feet, recognizing that this altitude represented a fundamental strategic advantage. The lesson of the B-29 echoed through the following decades. In the era of strategic bombers, altitude was not just a specification, it was destiny. The U-2, the SR-71 Blackbird, and even modern stealth bombers followed the principle established by the B-29. When you can operate above the effective range of the enemy, you are not just bombing, you are demonstrating absolute technological supremacy. At 31,150 feet, the B-29 not only won battles, it redefined what it meant to control the skies.